kind of interesting here. It talks about, excuse me, sir, there's a band of Visigoths in here with a plan to reform Rome. A little bit of Revelation humor, well, because when these babies got done with Rome, it was sacked.
What do you want?
I mean, it was sacked.
Oh, she didn't give you it, didn't give you it?
I mean, it was swept. Totally, see now, here we are, totally pillaging. I mean, these guys just didn't reserve, protect anything. They just plundered, just like a bunch of kids going into a school building and trashing the school, throwing computers upside down, flushing cherry bombs down the toilets, and just seeing how much damage we can do. But these guys were worse than
And they were called
kids
the what?
flushing cherry
The
bombs down
goths?
toilets. These guys were called the Vandals, and that's
Oh,
where
yeah.
we get the word vandalize
Oh,
from.
yeah.
These guys were-
Visigoth.
The who?
No, from Vandals.
Vandals, okay, but
Yeah,
it comes
Vandals.
from, how do you pronounce that word?
A Visigoth?
Visigoth.
Visigoth, yeah, the
Yeah,
Vandals.
Visigoth.
Okay, so
And they had
it's,
a Docer and the Haruli and the Goths and the Visigoths and all the others. In the,
They were bad, man.
Since the Visigoth kind of rhymes with Visa, do you think that Visa people are scant rent?
no, nobody?
Since Visigoths kind of rhyme with Visa, do you
They
think
have
that,
nothing to do with Visa MasterCards.
I was trying to say that they were vandals.
Yeah, these guys are not good guys.
These guys were butchered.
Remember in the book of Revelation it says these things which are going to come shortly to pass in John's day, and that began around chapter 4, chapter 5, after the 7 churches of Asia were mentioned. And as these things are going in succession, the historical approach is that these were the various tribes that came in and plundered Rome in the west. And the big date there was 476 AD when we finally pillaged for the last time. But these guys pillaged and plundered worse than the Vikings, because the Vikings were part of these Vandals and Huns and all the others. In our past study, when we were talking about God's judgment on a nation and on an empire that persecuted and tried to destroy His church, the folks underneath the altar of God who were martyrs for the faith says, Lord, how long, how long, how long? And God said, shortly, but there's a few more of your brethren that got to die yet. Oh, swell, that's bad news. That's not necessarily good news. Well, it's good news you're going to heaven, but bad news you're leaving your family a little earlier than you expected. But in these, in the chapter when these trumpets sounded, we see that each is referring to a plundering horde coming in and attacking Rome on the rivers, on the seas, on the land, and destroying even the orchards and the permanent pastures and fields, and destroying the entire economy of the agriculture. And then this is where we run into the, if you remember, the Alaric leading the Goths against Rome, 403 to 410. Their Gothic invasion was totally on land as they hit Italy and hit into Spain and into Greece. That was the Alaric Gothic invasion. Alaric was trained by the Roman to fight for the Romans. And what they didn't make good their promises to him. He says, fine, now I've got your armor and I've got your war techniques and battle techniques, and I'm going to come in and use your same techniques against you. And so they created their own Frankenstein monster by not paying up. They were giving them land grants and some other things they're supposed to be giving them for fighting for the Romans. And it was bad news when Rome decided to tick off their so-called ally. But the Romans had an attitude too. They were us Romans and everybody else. And they had this hoity-toity attitude that everybody else was a barbarian. They were not educated and they were not cultured like us Romans who sent people into the gladiatorial combat and fight to the death and all the other things that were supposed to be civilized. Here's where you have the city being pillaged, the statues coming down, the marching through the cities, just tearing everything just like a bulldozer, like a bull in a china shop. Genestric led the Vandals in the sea battles against Rome, and then this was the sea battles coming out of Carthage and up into attacking the coastal areas. And here we have the migration of the Vandals, and these were the sea battles as they raged. And then Attila the Hun, he came on the 5 rivers against Rome, and his battle technique is he kind of lead them along, and then they'd retreat across the river. And then as the Roman legions came wading waist deep or chest deep in water in the river, then all of a sudden he'd turn on them and cut them down, because they pretend like they're going to retreat. And as soon as they got you in the river, then they start whacking your head off. And when you're this deep in water, it's kind of hard for you to fight a guy on a horseback with a spear. And this was the invasion of the Huns under Attila, 450 AD, so this is a 50-year ongoing God's judgment on Italy. And then finally, Odoacer leads the Heruli against Augustulus in Rome, 476 AD. And 476 AD is the key date to remember the fall of Rome in the West. And you've got 1453, which is the fall of Rome in the East. Because you had the Roman Catholic Church settling in Rome, Italy, and you had the Greek Orthodox, and later on the Russian Orthodox that spun off from it over in Constantinople. Now, this is Odoacer's kingdom. If you notice, he completely took over Italy and some of the surrounding territories. And this was his kingdom in 480 AD. He didn't keep it forever, but he did have control over it. You notice the Visigoths here in Spain, the Suevi, the Vandals settled in old ancient Carthage. This is where Hannibal led the Alps across, the elephants across the Alps into attack them from the north down. You have the Danes, you have the Swedes, the Angles and the Franks from France. The Angles later on became English. These are all the Angles and the Saxons moved to England, and then you have all the other, the Heruli and the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths and just the Goths. And then Mari with the Moors. This was the Islam, where they took over all the western, northern Africa. And then you have all these invasions of the Roman Empire. Here you have again your Vandals coming up on the sea power, and your Ostrogoths coming down from land, the Huns coming down and doing their damage in Europe and into the northern, up into the Alps. And then Constantinople become the shining area. Carthage was a competitor to Rome, and Scipio was the young, they never had a general under 45 years old, and Scipio was in his 20s, and after Hannibal ran up and down in Rome destroying everything, he ended up losing all his elephants. And Scipio says, okay, I'm going to do the same, I'm going to bring the battle to the Carthaginians. So what he did, while he would never attack the Roman city, he tried, but he didn't have a big enough army to break down the walls of Rome, but he pillaged the countryside and all the villages. So Scipio ran an attack on Spain, and this was called New Carthage, right in this area, it's called New Carthage. And it forced Hannibal to come back from Rome and protect his land. And the Carthaginians, who he protected, his brother went back and had thousands of rings from all the noble sons that were killed in one of the big battles there in Italy. And in that particular battle, when they dumped out the rings, the fathers of Carthage says, well, you know, we've got enough stuff to take care of, you're on your own. Which means they're going to tell Rome, well, that was one of our renegade generals that went amok, and we're not responsible for him. He's his own man. And so they were going to turn Hannibal, the city fathers of Carthage, even though he was trashing and whooping up on the Romans, when he called for reserves, they wouldn't send reserves. And this was like 200 BC, way before the Roman period of time. And finally, he made a pledge to his father that he would fight the Romans to his death. And after the final battle with Scipio, Scipio had to face his battle elephants again. And instead of running his men in a close formation where the elephants come through like a bulldozer, what Scipio did is he stationed his troops so that whenever the elephants came through, the troops would go whoosh, and on this side, whoosh, and the elephant just charged down empty aisles. He left aisles at his battlefront, and once the elephants went charging through, there are no more threats. So he neutralized the battle elephants. And they said the two greatest generals that ever fought was Hannibal and Scipio. And Hannibal would say Scipio was a little bit better because he defeated me. That was the only defeat that Hannibal had. But when Hannibal left for his life, his city father was going to turn him over to the Romans, and they would have, give him a triumphal march and then crucified him or chopped his head off, whatever they wanted to do with him, or put him to the sword. So he escaped and ended up 13 years joining anybody that hated Rome. And finally the Romans said, okay, the next generation grew up well, and all the fathers that died at this particular battle, their sons now are going to get revenge, blood revenge. And now they're of battle age, and so they're going to go after Hannibal years after he ended up killing all their fathers. Because every household, every dad was killed in this battle. And he wiped out the entire, they came against him, he had 35,000 men against, I think, 75,000. And he fell back, and as the Romans charged forward, he ran his cavalry back behind, his side flanks pulled in, they surrounded the Romans and butchered all 75,000. Yes, ma'am.
What does Goths mean?
Who?
There's three different types of people there. Goth, Visigoth, and Ostrogoth. What is Goth mean?
Well, it's just like, Mississippi Southern and Alabama Southern and Georgia Southern. They're all Goths, but from different
Areas.
geographic districts or provinces or
But
territories.
they're all from the same.
But they're all Gothic people. They just, they just, they have the last name Goths. They're all Gothic people.
They were just
And you
warlike
talk
by
about
name.
Gothic cathedrals and Gothic architecture. So Gothic has carried over into the Hunchback of Notre Dame. The cathedral there was all Gothic. But the interesting thing goes on here that the Romans sent assassins to take Hannibal out. And so Hannibal says, they're not going to get the pleasure of putting me out. And he was off, I think he was up into here or here and off fighting against Rome. And as they were sending the assassins to put a whack on him, he took his own life with poison. And so Hannibal did not give them the privilege of assassinating him. He just took his own life and went out. And that was the early judgment. But what Hannibal ended up doing, he forged Rome into a nation. His battle strategy and his whatever caused the Romans to rise up. And they became an empire instead of a nation because of Hannibal whooping up on them. It forged steel and forged the Roman Empire. So that by the 100 AD, Rome had spread out to its farthest. And then all those roads that Rome built, those fancy roads that you could travel, a postal service could travel 100 miles a day. Now a traveler could travel 20 to 25 miles, and they put way stations every day's journey. But the roads that he built, that the Roman Empire built, were the same roads the enemy came marching, when Johnny comes marching home again, hurrah, hurrah. Those same highways that they built were the roads that the enemy came down, that had to cut through swamps and over whatever. They came marching down the Roman roads, and the saying was, all roads lead to Rome. So, anyway, so tonight's lesson, we're going to go chapter 8 and chapter 11, and we're going to start off in chapter 9 and begin reading. I need somebody to read the fifth angel sounding.
How much
Beginning
you
in
want,
9:1.
Greg?
Hmm?
Then the fifth, how many verses?
Well, until you get through the fifth angel sounding.
Then the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fallen from heaven to the earth. To him was given a key to the bottomless pit, and he opened the bottomless pit, and smoke arose out of the pit like the smoke of a great furnace. So the sun and the air were darkened because of the smoke of the pit. Then out of the smoke locusts came upon the earth.
Keep going.
And to them was given power as the scorpions of the earth have power. They were commanded not to harm the grass of the earth, or any green thing, or any tree, but only those men who do not have the seal of God on their foreheads. And they were not given authority to kill them, but to torment them for 5 months. Their torment was like the torment of a scorpion when it strikes a man. In those days men will seek death and will not find it, They will desire to die, and death will flee from them. The shape of the locust was like horses prepared for battle. On their heads were crowns of something like gold, and their faces were like the faces of men. They had hair like women's hair, and their teeth were like lions' teeth. And they had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was like the sound of chariots, with many horses running into battle. They had tails like scorpions, and there were stings in their tails. Their power was to hurt men 5 months, and they had as king over them the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, but in Greek he has the name Apollyon. One woe is past, behold, still 2 more woes are coming
Okay, stop right there.
after these things.
Thank you, Peg.
Oh,
Okay, here's where we are. And this is Revelation Review. I had a little fun with this, the book Revelation for Dummies. I don't have a copy of it.
boy, that's
And Glenn
good.
says, oh, I need to get on the internet and check it out. I said, Glenn, you get on the internet and check it out. That's his assignment. Credit.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, the fifth one, where it talks about the star falling from heaven, is either the Arabians, the Saracens, or Muhammad himself. And this is where Muhammad leads the Arabians as locusts in 600 AD. And this is where they're coming up against Constantinople. And in this picture you have, and the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle. And the sound of their wings was like the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. Of course, the Arabian horse takes the lead throughout the world.
Yeah.
And skill in horsemanship is the art and science of Arabia. You talk about Arabian horses. Who in here's got an Arabian horse? Okay, Harris, you know everything we need to know about Arabian horses, and that's where it all started. And the barbed Arabs, swift as locusts and armed like scorpions, ready to dart away in a moment, were ever prepared unto battle. This is Keith that wrote in his commentary in 1833, talking about the Arabian and its attack here. Now Keith, of course, was a commentator that took the historical position. Now 1833 and today is 2015, so that's 167 and 15,
182 years.
182 years ago. Keith took this position, the historical position. This is before folk got into the modern position of other modern interpretation that all revelations feature. But this was his interpretation. Interesting thing too, if you notice, it says they had faces like men,
Yeah.
but they had hair like women. They were long-haired. So they had faces of men, long hair, and it talked about their yellow and their scarlet, their red, and their yellow and the red, the different colors that are pictured in Revelation fit the battle gear of the ancient Saracens and Arabians as they swarmed across the country like locusts. Now here's the Ottoman Turks. They're going to take Constantinople AD 1453. And that's where we get into the next part. I need somebody to read verse 13 on to the end of the chapter.
The sixth angel sounded his trumpet, and I heard the voice coming out of the horns of the golden altar that is before God. And it said to the sixth angel who had the trumpet, "Release the 4 angels who are bound at the great river Euphrates, and the 4 angels who have been kept ready for this very hour, and day and month and year were released to kill 1/3 of mankind." The number of mounted troops was 200 million. I heard their number. The horses and the riders I saw in my vision looked like this. Their breastplates were fiery red, dark blue, and yellow as sulfur. The heads of the horses resembled the heads of the lions, and out of their mouths came fire, smoke, and sulfur. 1/3 of mankind was killed by the 3 plagues of fire, smoke, and sulfur that came out of their mouths. The power of the horses was in their mouths and in their tails, for their tails were like snakes, having heads with which they inflict injury. The rest of mankind that were not killed by these plagues still did not repent of the work of their hands. They did not stop worshiping the demons and idols of gold, silver, bronze, steel, stone, and wood, idols that cannot see, hear, or walk, nor did they repent of their murders, their magic arts, their sexual immorality, or their thefts.
Okay, in the dating here, when it talks about the brimstone or the sulfur and the smoke, it's referring to gunpowder, and the first time the Turks used cannon to batter down the walls. We'll go into that in a bit. Also, it talked about the month, the year, and so on was 396 days, which translated in the prophecy 396 years, 4 months. And so from the year 1057 to the year 1483, he talked about how the Arabs were held back at the Euphrates for so long, and God held these powers back until such a time as a number of years goes by. Now, we're not going to go into a lot of detail about the day-year theory, or not the day-year theory, but the day-year interpretation. Remember how Israel's spies were 40 days spying out the land? And God says, okay, you doubted me, so you're going to be in wandering for 40 years. Your day is 40 years.
For each year.
And we're going to find that God does that consistently. In the book of Daniel, he did this consistently, where he talked about so many times and half a time, and Jesus is going to get, talks about the first coming of Christ in prophecy, and talking about the abomination of desolation, book of Daniel, but we're not going into that. But the day year, we'll get into that again. We talk about 42 months, time times half a time, 3.5 years. And the prophecy goes when the Arabs were first in the Euphrates, and as we go into the Euphrates, and finally they're released after the woe coming in, and they're going to bring out gunpowder. And the picture too of the Arabs, he says, do not hurt the forest. These guys did not deforest the land. Some of the people tore down and cut down the plantation, the orchard trees. Now in Jamaica, we lost 500 acres of coffee orchard. Some farmers are out there burning off their land. They do that after they do their sugar cane. They burn off the land, purify. And the wind took it and burned out 500 acres of coffee. And the price now for Jamaica Blue Mountain coffee is $60 a pound is what it's selling for. And that's retail price. Wholesale price is $10 more than retail was a year ago. But then the Arabs, they deliberately, some of the Vandals tore up the land, but these guys were told not to destroy the forest. And that was part of their policy. But it talks about horses' tails. They had horses' tails as far as their battle insignia, and they also had horses as far as they were complete cavalry. These guys could live in the saddle, fight in the saddle, be bull-legged in the saddle, and shoot their arrow from the saddle. And these guys were expert marksmen.
Yeah.
Now, in this, if you notice the cannon, this is the bringing of the cannon as the Ottoman Turks came in to take Constantinople. May 29th, 1453 was its destruction. Now, this is the turban guys, the face of a man, the long hair of a woman, and you notice it's all cavalry, all horsemanship, and the huge cannon that were used to batter down the walls. And there was no defense. I mean, the cannon made obsolete castle walls.
Guy on either side of the horse carrying a rifle
Yeah,
or a pistol.
yeah.
It is a rifle.
Right there.
Turkish Islam was more severe than the others.
Here's the bombardment of the city, knocking down the towers, battering down and marching and taking over the entire city. Now, we talked about the range of the desert locusts revealing a striking relationship with the early spread of Islam. Now, the desert locusts usually range from Arabian Africa and into Spain, but you see the locust range. Now, after the Arab Wars, this is Muslim areas. You notice from the beginning of India into Mecca, across Africa and into Spain. So this is kind of a Saracen empire during the time of Charles the Great. And this is all the area that was left to Europe. And it was the Charles Martel, the Battle of Tours, that kept us from becoming a Muslim Europe.
Wow.
This is what brought about, of course, the Catholic and later on the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther. Because that came on, 100 years later. After Constantinople fell, then you had the Protestant Reformation breaking the back of the Roman Catholic Church. And 100 years ago, we had a Protestant Reformation where South and Central America. Catholics are leaving the Catholic Church by the tens of thousands, and priests are leaving the priesthood by the thousands. And so we find in Central and South America a Protestant Reformation within the last 50 years, 100 years. There's been that transition. Now, the Muslims talk about the bloody Christian Crusades. And this is a ploy, or they say, well, you guys, the Christian Crusades, you guys are nasty and us, and so therefore we have a right to ISIS and all this other stuff you're hearing today. See on this particular, these are all the battles of the Crusades during those various, I think there are 4 or 5 crusades in the 1000s that were waged to try to get Israel, get Jerusalem back into Western Europe and back into Catholic hands. The crazy thing is there are 2 churches of the Nativity, or churches of the Crucifixion, and one is outside the gate called Gordon's Calvary, and one's inside the gate, which is the modern place of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And the thing is, after sending all those people in those battles for the Crusades, the Roman Catholic Church is not going to admit that, oh, we had all these crusades to win this church back from the Muslims for us Catholics, and it was a wrong geographical location. We fought for the wrong location, because the Bible says Jesus was crucified outside the city gate, Hebrews, and Gordon's Calvary seems to match more the biblical description of the rock, the skull rock. And Glenn, you want to share a minute?
Yeah, they say that the original gates were inside of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and that it was, in Jesus' day, it was outside. But just a little fitting sidebar to that, if you go to Gordon's Calvary, the Catholics own that site too.
Okay, they took over that.
So they got both sides.
No, they got both of them covered. Okay, but you notice the Muslim conquest up here? These are all the battles the Muslims had over Spain. These are all the battles over for the islands of Sicily and Crete. All the battles in Rome and into Greece. All the battles around Constantinople. And all the battles all over the known world sweeping through North Africa. I mean, there are hundreds of battles. The Muslims, they say, well, we're just such a peaceful people. They are peaceful people. We'll take a piece of Egypt, a piece of Libya, a piece of Algeria, and a big piece of Spain, because they're so peace-loving. And we'll take a little piece of Sicily and Crete. And we'll take a piece of Rome, and a piece of Greece and Austria, and a little piece of Asia Minor, and a little piece of Israel, and a little piece of Jordan, and a little piece of Afghanistan, and a little piece of Turkmenistan, and a little piece of whatever. And yeah, they're such a peace-loving people.
What's the date of these battles?
This was during the Muslim takeover, 400 years, from about 850 to 1450, 1850 to about 1450. Yes.
Always, in all of their battles, in all of their travels throughout the history of Islam, their evangelism was conquest.
Yeah.
It was not to change the heart, but conquest.
And the only way you can save your life is says, yes, I will submit and pay tax, because they don't want to kill all the taxpayers off. But you either converted or you died by the sword, and that is the doctrine of Islam, whether they want to own up to it or not today. They are
and that's the doctrine of peaceful Islam.
Yeah, this is peaceful Islam. You either submit and pay taxes or die. And when they die, they talk about off with your head, like the Queen of Hearts.
Nowadays.
So this is the conquest of Constantinople, 1453. What a city we have to plunder. What a city we have given to plunder and destruction. And this is the final, and this is what ends Revelation chapter 9. Woe, woe, woe. God's judging upon Rome in the west with the Goths and Visigoths and Ruli and others, and now God's judgment upon Rome in the east, Constantinople, 1,000 years later, 476, 1453. But still God's judgment upon the Roman Empire Papal Rome and also the Eastern, the Greek Rome. Now, there are some interesting things that it talks about the woe, woe, woe. I watched an eagle that was flying midair, and there was 3 woes, and the trumpet blast about to be sounded by the other 3 angels. And the 5th trumpet was the demon locust from the abyss, which was the rise of the Islam under Muhammad. And finally, we had the 6th trumpet, 200 million demonic riders from the Euphrates. And you notice that they have 200 million soldiers. And we're going to park on this for tonight for a little bit. Now, we can already see who are the 200 million man army that will invade Israel. On September 25th, 2014, they said, will Israel someday cry out the 200 million Chinese are coming? Or perhaps they'll cry out the Russians are coming. Well, such an army of 200 million will definitely include Chinese, but it will not be China. And while it will definitely include nations that were part of Russia, it will not be Russia. And we're already seeing the nations working to unite, whose armies constitute even more than a 200 million man army. But the enemies who are preparing to come against Jerusalem will deny the Trinity and will all be Muslim. All we need to know to see this is look at the political earthquakes and see the new fault lines that are already being drawn. Here, let me explain everything, but I do not need your keen eye and your patience, so forget the football and the popcorn for a change. First of all, today the U.S., Russia, and China, like Israel, all have Islamic terrorism problems. They're all fighting the same enemies, Islamic ideologues who seek a global caliphate based in Turkey. Just keep your eyes on the flags.
Wow.
And the fire red, the hyacinth blue, and the sulfur yellow. Now, this is one man's interpretation of the Shabbat foundation of Wally Shabbat and the Shabbat exclusive. He's looking at a 200 million man army. Now, that's what he claims. And I'm looking at it from a logical thing. Is there any place on earth where there is and exists a 200 man army? And don't answer that question. I'll answer it for you. This is back in 2010. This is 7 years ago. And this was in the height of Desert Storm and Afghanistan and our going against Iraq. China, as of that time, had 2.25 million. Not 200 million, 2.5 million back in 2010. Now I'm giving you just the facts, just the facts. And this is where they have their army, here's their navy, here's their air force, and their other coast guard, whatever. The United States is a little over 1.5 million. And this is back before our boys start coming back home. We welcome home a lot of the troops, and this is where Jeb Bush is being critical of the Russian dictator, prime minister, throwing his weight around there in Ukraine and being bully. He says, we need to pull him back because when he pushes until somebody says, you're not pushing anymore, Mr. Putin, back off. But United States, here's India. I didn't know India was the 3rd largest army, over 1.25 million.
Wow, that's a lot.
And then North Korea is almost 1 million plus.
Yeah, but that's a long time.
Russia is over 1 million. But you notice Russia has the 5th largest army. China has double. And that's why the Russians and the Chinese are always fighting at their borders and always concerned. Now look at Pakistan. It's got 750,000 apparently, or between 500 and 750,000 troops. So Pakistan is a large army. Iran had a 500,000 man army. Turkey's a 500,000 man. I didn't think Turkey was that big of a nation, but they got a 500,000 soldiers. Look at Vietnam and Egypt. And then your smaller countries, Brazil, Syria, Japan, Eritrea, Britain, Israel it runs up about 250,000 to 300,000. It's a small nation. What is the population of Israel today?
6 million.
Okay, about 6 million. There's more Israelites that are living in New York City and in Holland and in Europe and in everywhere else. It's like in Jamaica, the more Jamaicans living outside of Jamaica than living in Jamaica.
But they're moving to Israel.
Yeah, there's a huge migration, always has been, and some church organizations make a point of paying air transportation to get the Russian Jewish people out of Russia Well, they have that.
International
Yes,
Christians
well-
and Jews.
So the Swedish not have an army?
Well, they don't have an army big enough to count.
Okay.
Now they look at Switzerland, Tom, and they say, well, what about the Swiss? Well, the Swiss army is about 100,000 men. And somebody asked the Swiss, the Switzerland has equipped that their tunnels can be blown up. And every one of those highways, super highways up in the mountains are landing strips. Every one of them are designed as landing strips. They can blow up their tunnels and they can run everything off their landing strips. And they said, okay, even though you're a neutral country, Switzerland, what happens with your 200,000 men if you get invaded by an enemy of 200,000 men? You know what they told them, Tom? Our men will just shoot twice.
Oh, wow. Great.
But look at this. If we talk about, you know, the Bible, remember he's talking in symbols. And people that want to literalize Revelation are going to take that 200 million man army and say it's got to come out of China because they're the ones that can marshal a 200 million man army. Well, now we got India that's just as big as, or bigger than China because of their one baby policy, and you abort the baby girls and you keep the baby boys in China. And they got reverse sexual discrimination in China's one baby policy. Morty?
There is an historical concept that holds that this refers to the Arabs only. And that historical concept reaches from 600 AD to our time. And they say it includes, this concept includes all of these, which could be the 200. And that's a...
Well, the thing is, it's still in symbolism, rather. We cannot take it literal. If we take it a little 200 million, from what I've done in investigation, it doesn't make logical sense because there ain't a 200 million man army out there.
No.
I mean, as far as we've done our homework, Harry, and the best I can come up with is 2.25 million people out of China. And if I add the India and China don't get along, and India and Pakistan don't always get along, there's always a nuclear standoff between them. But if we took everybody all together, we're going to come up with 15.916 million military. You know,
Per thousand.
or whatever, no, here's military personnel per thousand population. Okay, here's Israel, 23%, or 23 military per thousand.
Look at North Korea.
48.7
That's scary.
per thousand. You see, they're always, yeah, it's and those idiots got a nuclear bomb. You know, that's all we need. You know, nuclear for peace. Here's the secrets to nuclear power. Just sign this little piece of paper that you use it for peace. Okay, here's all our secrets. Thank you. Assured mutual destruction. But let's go on. Here we got into. We're going to save all questions for when I'm done. Here's China. Its army is. Here's the top 10 countries, the largest armies. Here's one that lists everything: 16 million, 11 million. 9 million, 5 million, China, India, North and South Korea, USA up to 4 million, and Vietnam 4 million, Turkey 4 million, Russia 3 million. So this is another 10 top countries. And it depends on, you read one and it says this much, and you read another and it says that much. After World War II, a lot of our armies were disbanded. And I'm just thinking with MacArthur, we should have taken Russia while we had the chance. Okay, but here's the 10 of the largest armies. This is the Mongol hordes. And I think they talked about the Mongol hordes being 600,000 or 700,000 troops coming in. Hannibal had only 35,000 when he crossed the Alps. He lost a lot of them crossing the Alps. And his first battle was against about 80,000 Romans. I mean, he was a major player, but 35,000 against 80,000. Whenever Caesar went up against that Queen Boudica, Queen Boudica had like 180 to 200,000 troops. The Romans only had about 40,000, 35,000, maybe 28,000. But in their formation, they just mowed them down. They just stayed in armor and formation, and they just sickle-scythed down Boudica's army, even though they outnumbered them about 8 to 1. But that's a big army. We're thinking about how many. I asked Morty how many on D-Day. He figured 450, 500,000 men on D-Day. I don't know exactly. I'm just asking Morty what he remembered. Is that accurate?
We had 100 and some thousand Americans.
Just in there. Okay, here's the Golden Horde. here's where you had China coming into the southern empire. Here's where you have the Mongol military routes. Here you have the Mongol empire as it spreads throughout here. And you also have the route of Giovanni Gargiri and the route of different ones. But this is the Mongol hordes that spread like locusts, setting up the caliphate in Arabia. Now later on, the Japanese come and do an invasion in China. China ends up with its own power. They invade Tibet and other areas. And the Mongolians, as we know the Mongolians, Mongolia is just a small little has-been. It better been a has-been or never was. Now, these are some of the larger armies as we're moving along. I don't know if this is the demon army spitting out laser. This is how some of the people interpret Revelation. And they have these guys spitting out laser cannon, frying everybody like a ray gun in stormtroopers
Where
or
is
Star
that?
Trek.
Where
This
is it?
isn't. This is just somebody's imagination.
I
of
mean,
going
is it in here?
Revelation.
yes, no, maybe.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. I don't know. But this is some artist's picture of
Depends
some
on what
of the,
translation you have.
things going on.
Yeah.
But, you know, my Bible says they're riding horses, and he gives colors, and the Arabs fit that picture. An army is a sizable structure, a assembly of people. They're trained and armed in defense of the country they're serving. Armies in times of war fight on land. It's their expertise to defend the nation on land. As in the increase of turmoil between countries and nations arise all over the world, they increase their protection. Defense becomes a priority to all governments. Territories and interests are some of the things that armies need to protect in a nation, whether the disturbance may come internally or externally. The size of an army is one of the criteria determining the power of a nation. Its size directly refers to the number of its personnel in service. Other decisive factors of one's army may include technology, capabilities, training, composition, organization, number of boats, number of planes, number of lasers, number of stealth planes, number of bombers, number of surface-to-surface nuclear, siloed, and those from submarine and all that other. And that's why we as a nation don't have as big an army as China, and that big an army as India. We don't need it. You just throw a few nukes over there, it's a golf course. Okay, these are the biggest armies, 10 of the biggest armies in the world. This is one of the armies, American Army. This is, here's another, and I think this is either the Pakistani Army. This is the India Army. This is the Chinese Army. Look at this. Hey, Will, you're ready to go. Johnny goes marching home again. Hurrah, hurrah. And those little ladies who cut your head off, man, and smile at you and says, okay, big boy, you're fodder now.
They're Chinese.
Yeah, this is
Women's.
yeah, this is a women's corps.
Wow.
I had to throw this in, Martha, for your.
I
No,
know,
not
they
really.
look
I just
like
toss it in there.
cheerleaders. They look like cheerleaders.
Yeah, you have kind of cutesy outfits, don't they? They look a little sharper than what you used to wear.
Don't forget to
The
smile.
color is ugly.
Yeah, the colors.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
Okay, here's
I don't know smile.
here's I don't know if this is the Japanese army,
South Korea.
but this is the Korean. I don't know, but maybe or this may be the Vietnamese army. What army is this? This is the Chinese army. You can tell by this little symbol, that's Chinese. Now, the historicist looks at this section in 8:1 to 13 as the trumpets are the stages of church history from about 400 AD until the 15th century, which is 1453, or to present, which some extend everything to the future. The premillennial takes it that the trumpets are a vision of the Roman war with the Jews, 70 AD, in the first century, and extend the seals description in further detail. The futures, the trumpets describe the events of the tribulation, last days, future, yet to come. And the idea is that the trumpets are about cycles of human sin, consequence, and God's salvation, which is kind of a figurative, real figurative. The sixth angel sounds his trumpet, and I heard a voice coming. The sixth angel, and it had a trumpet, released the four angels who were bound at the great river Euphrates. So we know this was Arab because Euphrates gives us a geographical location. And the four angels held back these forces for the 400 years. I'll save your questions for the end. The four angels represent the four principalities of the Turkish Empire. The Turks destroyed the last of the Roman Empire, 1453. That's the position I favor. Others take the four angels represent the four legions of Roman soldiers stationed in Syria that Vespasian led against the Jews around 70 AD. The colors mention are Roman military colors. Well, that's an explanation. I never heard that one before, but it is an interesting one. Or they represent the armies of the Orient that will march against Israel in the last days. They'll cross the Euphrates as a signal of war. That's where they talk about Russia's going to invade Israel and there's going to be blood on the bridles of the horses up to their whatever. The four angels represent the judgment of God that comes on evil when there is no more restraint, which is represented by the river Euphrates. Four interpretations. To me this makes the most sense, but then others have other. The little scroll, we're coming up into the promise for the church, and this is where we're going to go into the next chapter. And so we're going to pass that up. I believe we're going to pass that up there. Seven trumpets. Seventh trumpet. The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and his Messiah and will reign forever. Seventh trumpet. And it seems like seven trumpets the end of the world. The interesting thing is there's more. It was the end of the world as far as the Roman Empire was concerned. It was the end of Rome in Rome, and the end of Rome in Constantinople. Now, for 2 minutes, let's answer some questions or comments. Glenn.
Population of Israel today is about 7.5 million, and 160,000 invaded on D-Day.
How many on D-Day?
160,000.
160,000.
That's according to the smartphone.
What
And
happened?
that smartphone knows
You mean
more
on the
than I remember.
first? You mean on the first day?
You mean they?
Yeah,
Okay.
landed on a 50-mile stretch of
Yeah,
heavy
they kept
fortified
on with
on the
they
French
had
coastline.
followed up with.
160,000.
Yeah, they had a half day before.
Yeah, by the time they're done there, they had a half band, but those guys, the initial, they're the first barrage and all. But Harry, what bothered me in doing this study and sharing this is I parked on that 200 million man army trying to make sense of it. And I still can't make sense of it. You try to find a literal, and the interpreters are Russia and China. But in reality, they don't have 200 million men. They have just, 1/10.
One of the historical claims that they hold to, they hold to is the fact that Russia will lead a coalition, world coalition, Europe, all of the other Arab countries, everything against Israel in the last days. And they say this is the 200 million. Now, that's
There's
one
no
con-
way you're
that's
going
one
to jam.
concept that's
There's
held.
no way you're going to jam 200 million soldiers into Israel.
Oh, I'm telling you, that's what they hold.
Yeah, I mean, physically, you cannot put 200 million soldiers in Israel.
Can you imagine that many people
That's
on
right.
what they call Megiddo?
You take everybody in America. How big is America? 200 million people.
260.
Okay, you take about 15, 20 years ago, they claimed America was 200 million people. Imagine every American, take every American, just pull them out of the gutters, pull them out of the schools, put them out of colleges, pull them out of the workforce. Everybody goes, and all America lands in Israel. Every American's in Israel. I mean, that interpretation of Revelation makes no sense. I'm sorry. It just, maybe I'm too logical. Maybe we're too organized. Maybe they say with God nothing's impossible.
Right.
I think it's stretching an interpretation. They're trying to still literalize something that says, I'm going to give you in signs and symbols. And he says these people are going to be like a 200 million horde of locusts coming in as far as the eye can see.
If you hold the premillennial view, you have to come to the literalism.
Yeah, the thing is, those that believe in a literal 1,000 year reign of Christ take a literal 200,000 man army. If you're going to take one thing literal, you're going to take the other thing literal. And if you take one figurative, then the other's figurative. And the Bible starts out in Revelation chapter 1. John, I'm going to give you these things in signs and symbols. He comes out and says, I'm going to give them to you in signs and symbols.
Basically, that's why they take Daniel and Revelation and get it all out of whack, because of that literalism.
And this is, so if we take Revelation, interpret like it's supposed to, the way it says, then it makes a little more sense to us, I hope. God bless you. Thank you for racing through with these armies all over the world.
Wow, that was